Hi everyone, I'm Anne Riddell and welcome to Arts in the City. We kick things off today with a trip back in time. HBO's hit series The Gilded Age takes a fictional look at the lives and fortunes of the New York City elite in the late 1800s. Our Neil Rosen got a tour of the show's Long Island set in advance of the new season.
This is a turning point in the history of Mrs. Russell. But are we headed in the right direction?
In the HBO series The Gilded Age, whose second season debuts this fall, the late 1880s were indeed a turning point for high society in New York, both architecturally and socially. It was at that time that the wealthy residents built eye-popping, opulent mansions where money was no object.
My goodness, how splendid.
That bygone era was led by the wealthy Russell family in the show, who were loosely based on the Vanderbilts and the Astors.
Mrs. Astor, how good of you to come.
How kind you are to receive me, Mrs. Russell.
Looking at old photographs and actual buildings that are still remaining in Manhattan, Emmy Award-winning production designer Bob Shaw meticulously recreated New York in the 19th century, including where I'm standing right now, which is supposed to be 61st Street between Madison and Fifth Avenue in 1883.
Shaw and his team built the Gilded Age's retro street in Bethpage, Long Island. And while there's nothing inside, just the outside facades, the lavish interiors were recreated on an enormous nearby soundstage.
Well, the heart of our story is old money versus new money. Most of the show is sort of bits and pieces of various historic properties. The doors, like right near me here, are very similar to the ones on the Lotus Club. The general shape of the mansion is very similar to the Duke Mansion, which of course is later than our period. The columns on the facade are similar to the Sloane Mansion. And even the front drive-up is inspired by the Cooper Hewitt, because we didn't want our carriages to be waiting on the curb. The Cooper Hewitt was the Carnegie Mansion, has that big drive-through in the front.
How much of this stuff remains?
We were definitely, inspired by what still remains. The difficulty is there are individual mansions, but there's usually nothing across the street from them, and there's nothing to the side of them. So I always compare it to the Beverly Hillbillies, where you can look at the mansion and you can't look across the street, you can't look to the left, and you can't look to the right. That's one of the reasons we ended up building a back lot, because we could find individual buildings and point the camera toward the building, but you can't really do a scene or have any kind of dynamic camera work when you can't look in so many directions.
The tops of the brownstones and many additional buildings were computer generated and added digitally with special effects to create what you see here in the finished product. But the horse-drawn carriages, people dressed in period costume, and other vintage props on the street are all very real.
You see some houses that just have entrance stoops and a door, and the rest of the facade is green. At a certain point, we couldn't just continue to build and build, but by having the door be practical, they can have background people in costume walk up and down the stairs, enter the house, leave the house, even though the house itself is all computer generated. But we need a practical staircase to get them in and out.
The attention to period detail is remarkable. I'm looking at even the intricate carvings on the banister.
The carvings on the banister actually were copied from the front of the Ukrainian consulate on 79th Street. We took photographs, the person went and looked at it, and somebody hand carved and formed with clay one section of it, and then made a mold, and we cast the rest of it.
Was there any period of time, even maybe later on, where that street would have looked like kind of what we're looking at now?
Yes,
to a large
yes,
extent?
Very much so. People continued to build brownstones, even when the richer people were building their marble mansions. But you go around the Upper East Side now, and you'll see plenty of brownstones still in existence.
In old Bethpage, Long Island, in what's supposed to be 1883 Manhattan on 61st Street between Madison and Fifth Avenue, for Arts in the City, I'm Neil Rosen.
Capturing the heart and soul of the Asian diaspora in a portrait. That is the specialty of artist Susan Chen. Our Susan Chen sat down with the artist, who was named a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree in 2022.
These paintings depict faces of the Asian diaspora, portraits that have long been missing from mainstream art.
Like a very specific class of people who get remembered in history, and so there are a lot of other races that sort of get erased or left out. So it's interesting to be living in a time now where there is like, artists who are working to sort of democratize like what portraiture could mean.
And Susan Chen happens to be one of those artists. Having painted almost 70 portraits of Asian Americans over Zoom during the pandemic, Chen is a 2022 Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, a Hopper Prize winner, and her portrait titled "I Am Not the Kung Flu" from her exhibition "I Am Not a Virus" graced the September cover of New York Magazine.
I think people think Asian Americans all fit into like a particular box, or it's a very specific like, oh, this is the immigrant experience. But I've just learned from like painting all of these portraits that like everyone is so different and like their experiences are very singular.
Which also applies to Chen. The painter's artistic journey has been anything but straightforward. Growing up in Hong Kong, Chen came from a family of illiterate farmers and factory workers from China and Taiwan. Chen attended an English boarding school on scholarship where she was one of just a few minorities. She later came to the U.S. to attend college where she was discouraged from taking art classes.
I had parents who were like, we didn't, work this hard, get you to an Ivy League school so that you could just like throw it all away to become a painter.
But fortunately, others encouraged Chen to pursue her passion.
When I got out of school, I had a corporate job for a year, but I was always like painting on the weekends, and I had a lot of coworkers that were like, what are you doing here? Like, you should make paintings. And it sort of helped encourage me to go to art school.
Chen received her Master of Fine Arts from Columbia University just as the pandemic hit. That's when she started painting portraits of Asian Americans as a reaction to anti-Asian sentiment. Chen, whose own sister was twice the target of hate attacks, put a spotlight on the humanity of her subjects during a time when there was so much blind hatred towards Asian Americans.
For me, and probably a lot of sitters, you sort of grow up and you watch a lot of TV where you don't see yourself in it. And so your aspirations, maybe subconsciously, you're hoping, sort of always wanting to be a little like whiter or like less Asian. And I think painting these portraits have been really good. Also surveying sitters and how they feel. It's like really putting yourself like front and center and like feeling the sense of like worthiness that like you are good enough and you don't have to always like aspire to be like something that you're not.
When I asked Chen if she views her work as social activism, she says maybe it is, but it's not intentional.
I'm not really like a political or like confrontational person, so like sometimes I think it's funny when I like look back on the work and I'm like, oh, maybe I am.
The accomplished artist says the most satisfying and important part of her work is connecting with her community.
At the end of the day, you're like, the goal is for people to like be involved and to feel seen and get to share their stories.
Chen is currently working on a new show to share more stories through large multiracial group portraits. Many of Chen's recent paintings are on display at the Aldrich Museum. For Arts in the City, I'm Susan Chen.
Alice Austen is described as one of our country's most prolific female photographers. Born during the Victorian era, she was a rebel in both her work and her personal life. Next, we take you to Austen's family home in Staten Island, now a museum dedicated to remembering her bold spirit. If these walls could talk. Those words come to life inside the Alice Austen house on Staten Island. Alice Austen was born in 1866, a time when women's roles were narrowly defined, but not for Alice.
Alice was a real trailblazer. She was kind of a badass, if you like. She really broke a lot of the rules and these sort of very formal expectations of the way a Victorian woman should be.
Victoria Monroe is the executive director at the Alice Austen House.
Her real claim to fame is her photography. She was an incredible photographer. She received her first camera at age 10. She left us a legacy of around about 8,000 photographs of a changing New York City. And she also had intense relationships in her lifetime, which we celebrate here at the Alice Austen House as well. I think it's really important understanding and talking about Alice as a lesbian woman is really important to understanding her work more fully. There's many photographs that Alice would have taken for personal circulation amongst her and her friends. Some of these photographs are of Alice and her friends cross-dressing or breaking all these rules, like being in their petticoats, smoking fake cigarettes. Things that were absolutely no-no for a Victorian woman. And they're incredibly brave and bold and funny. And they definitely have a very particular queer sensibility.
Beyond her own environment, Alice Austen widely documented life in New York, often lugging heavy equipment on her bike. As the museum explains, she lived for decades in her childhood home with her longtime partner Gertrude Tate. But then came the stock market crash of 1929.
The story is really sad. So after they moved out of this home, they tried to keep an apartment together quite close by, but the financial burden plus Alice's arthritis made that impossible. And Gertrude's family said, Gertrude, you can come back and live with us in Brooklyn, but we will not take Alice because they called it the wrong kind of devotion. So Alice signed a note saying she had less than $20 to her name, and she had to go and live in the Staten Island poor farm.
The home that Alice lived in and then lost is now a city and national landmark, and in 2017, its designation was updated to become a national site of LGBTQ history. It is a place where the past is protected and nurtured, as are the cats roaming the grounds.
Alice and her family were huge cat lovers. They loved animals. So they all had various cats, and we now have a colony of black cats that live here that we affectionately call the Porstons.
The Alice Austen House hosts rotating exhibitions and cultural events, but the home and its permanent collection are a constant tribute to a woman who lived far ahead of her time.
She's this incredible, inspiring example of a life that's lived to the full, and someone who absolutely stayed true to her passions.
This year, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of hip-hop. A new exhibit at Photographisca explores the rise and proliferation of hip-hop through its 5 decades. Tiny insects in large format photographs. Our Andrew Falzon heads to the American Museum of Natural History to check out a new exhibit that highlights endangered insects in stunning detail.
Yeah, I think insects need a bit better PR, right? So we often only hear the bad stories of insects. And so we can turn to art to kind of maybe highlight, there's over 1.5 million described species of insects. Only a couple % of those are pests. The rest of them do often very important jobs that relate to things that allow humans to survive or allow ecosystems to function.
And that's just one of the goals of the ongoing photo exhibition at the American Museum of Natural History, entitled Extinct and Endangered Insects in Peril. It brings attention to the alarming plight of some of nature's smallest critters, which form the foundation of many ecosystems.
Insects are facing a period of decline, and so we know that insect biodiversity is being lost at an alarming rate. And so in collaboration with Liv van Bis, the exhibit really kind of came together to shine a bright light on insects and to show them in their beauty.
Liv van Bis is a British photographer who spent years enjoying commercial success when he saw his work devalued due to the proliferation of smartphone cameras and the internet. It was a chance encounter between his son and a beetle that gave his work a whole different direction.
Sebastian, he's still curious about the world, and then in spring, he brought in a ground beetle from the garden. And there was nothing particularly special about this insect. You know, it was a common species. But he was still curious, and he brought it up to my office, and we decided to look at it under his microscope. And this is what we saw. Now, when I first saw this, it blew me away. You know, up here, this is the back of the ground beetle. When I first saw it, it reminded me of a galaxy. And all the time, this had just been outside our window.
Bis has given multiple TED Talks on his work and has secured a partnership with the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. Oxford has given him open access to their catalog of bug specimen so that he may continue producing his incredible macro photography.
Each image in Extinct and Endangered is more than just a simple snapshot. It's actually a composite of somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 images.
The issue with photography at high magnification is there is inherently a very shallow depth of field. So to get around that, what I do is I put my camera on a rail that I can automate to move 10 microns in between each shot. That's about 1/7 the width of a human hair. And then that provides me with a stack of images, a deep stack of images, each have a tiny slither of focus all the way through. And I can squash that down to produce one image that is fully focused from front to back. They take about 3.5 weeks to create, and the file sizes, on average, are about 4 gigabytes. So I've got plenty of information to play with when I'm printing. And the prints at the exhibition are around the 3-meter mark.
In all, there are 40 photos lining the Extinct and Endangered galleries. The largest is 8 feet tall.
So sometimes we would get these images back that had been stitched together, and I can't remember a single time when we didn't all go, oh, when we saw what the final product looked like. So they were really breathtaking.
Each photo captures something unique, perhaps human-like, about the insects. You can see the fuzzy texture and earthy tones of the hair on this Raspa silk moth, or how the fractal segments of this dragonfly are reminiscent of a dark stained glass window. And if these images are making you look at insects through a different lens, you're not alone. Jessica devoted her entire career to insects, and these photos gave her a new perspective.
I really didn't appreciate the texture and the kind of three-dimensional morphology until I saw all of the photos kind of stacked together that Livan had done. Seeing it larger than life really makes you ask more questions.
I'm Andrew Falzon for Arts in the City.
New York City is often called the art capital of the world, a place where aspiring artists gather to kickstart their careers. Beth Kovetz spoke with one young filmmaker from South Korea about his work and how New York has influenced him.
In 2022, Min Soo Park, a young director from Seoul, premiered a film called Merlin at the New York City Short Documentary Festival, setting off a chain reaction of international success.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about Merlin. It's a short portrait documentary about Swiss artist Lucas. I met Lucas in Panama back in 2019, right before COVID started. I thought he resembled a character from a book called Zorba the Greek, and It was always in my mind, and then I had to shoot a thesis project for graduation, so I decided to fly out there and meet up with him again and shoot a documentary about true happiness. So we were driving by, and then we saw a tree in the field, and we're like, maybe we should get a shot of you running towards that tree, and that's how it happened. Most of it was improvised. One of my favorite filmmakers that's growing up, his name is Vincent Moon. He started La Bloga Tech. It's like a one-take live video of musicians, and that really influenced me, I think. And I was really interested in improvising just with a camera because it's possible now. I don't have to bring 20 people, but I can just be there with a camera and someone who can help me, and then a talent.
What drove you to become a film artist?
When you see what you only had in your head comes out on a screen and you see it with other people and then you share it, I think that's just a good part of it. But then it gets deleted from our memory so quickly, right? These days too, it's just gone within like 2 weeks. But maybe that's why I keep working too, like keep making new stuff, because it's so, maybe it's a generation thing too, because it gets forgotten so quickly. I just have to keep making new stuff, so they don't forget me, that I'm here like making videos.
The success of Merlin has opened doors around the world, so why stay in New York City?
I think the style here it's more diverse. Yeah, and it works out because a lot of Korean companies want to shoot in New York too, and then I'm here, and they'll see if you've done something of a decent size here, they'll see it as like, oh wow, this guy's done stuff in New York. New York is a great place to try out different things and establish myself, my style, and the work. Eventually, I think I want to bring that to Korea and then prove myself to my family. They were so against it at first.
And there are some things that haunt all young artists worldwide.
They wanted me to go to medical school, or not medical, pharmaceutical school. They still talk about it. They're like, oh, you could have been so stable if you became a pharmacist.
So at what point does the family back home start to think, we're so glad he's an artist?
When they see this.
For Arts in the City, this has been Lisa Beth Kovetz.
Years ago, comedian Henny Youngman played his violin and said, "Take my wife, please." You might call comedian Isabel Hagen Henny Youngman 2.0. She's also a talented director, actor, and violist. Our own funny guy got the chance to sit down with her, so take Barry Mitchell, please.
Please welcome the very funny Isabel Hagen.
My friend asked me how I stay so skinny. I don't know what to tell her. For me, it's just genetics. You know, like my grandma also starves herself.
Isabel Hagen, you have a flourishing career as a classical violist. You went to Juilliard. Why go into stand-up comedy?
I never really planned on actually trying stand-up comedy, but then during my master's at Juilliard, I got a repetitive stress injury in my wrist. I had tendinitis. I couldn't play for a few months. And so I had all this time on my hands. I was at music school, but I couldn't play music. So I went to an open mic and tried a set I had come up with. That's sort of where it started. And then when I graduated, I just started going to open mics every day and loved it and felt like a new me.
Love is the only thing that when you lose it, you doubt it ever existed in the first place. No one ever loses their keys and they're like, well, maybe there never were any keys. I don't even know.
Before I even did comedy, I think the comedian inside of me kind of started bleeding into my classical music performances. Subtly, I would say, okay, all I'm going to say about this piece is Schumann wrote it while he was absolutely insane. And then I would play. And there was just a little laughter there. And so that was an early hint that I was maybe into combining the two. I do still take viola gigs, fewer and fewer as I get more and more paid comedy work because I'm finding I just enjoy that more.
You even played in the pit of some Broadway musicals.
I have played as a substitute violist in Les Mis, Fiddler on the Roof, Lion King. It's an interesting world, the pit. In Les Mis, I could always see the front row when they stood up at the end. And What always got me was someone in the front was always crying at the end, and they had just seen their favorite Broadway show.
You helped give them an unforgettable experience.
Yeah, I was a little part of it.
I want to talk about your web series, Is a Violist?
Is a Violist is a play on my name, and she is a violist. So the idea was that each episode would be a different weird gig I played, because I've done all sorts of things.
She's so funny. She's so funny.
A riot?
Oh, no.
What? That's what you're going for, isn't it?
Your web series seems to be influenced by Curb Your Enthusiasm. It seems like a dystopia.
Yeah, there's a lot of cringe humor in it, for sure.
Mom, this is Isabel. She's going to be playing some music for you today.
Evelyn, do you like Bach?
No. Play, just play.
Oh, stop the music. And Is a Violist is a warm-up for more ambitious projects.
I'm actually working on a film right now, a feature film that I wrote and am directing and starring in, so hopefully that will continue. My friend recently told me I have resting sad face. I was like, oh no, it's active. Help.
You have another talent we haven't spoken about. Do your nose horn.
No one's ever asked me to...
Please do your nose horn.
Okay, so I have a third talent. I'm a musician, a comedian, and I can also... Sorry, I'm a little rusty.
That sounds like a tricycle horn. The multi-talented Isabel Hagen. I'm Barry Mitchell, and you're watching Arts in the City.
That is our show for today. Thanks so much for watching. A quick reminder to check us out on social media. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Anne Riddell. See you next time on Arts in the City.